Welcome. Happy Thursday. We're so glad you're here, and we're going to go ahead and get started now. It's December, and exactly 1 week ago, we were mindful of World AIDS Day. Tonight is part 2 of a 4-part series exploring the TV series Unspeakable with tonight's 90-minute session. For those joining us for the first time, Unspeakable is a mini-series that chronicles the emergence of HIV and hepatitis throughout Canada during the early 1980s and 90s, and the tragedy that resulted after thousands were infected by tainted blood. Like Canada, this history mirrors that of the US. If you don't know, HFA was founded in 1994, and we work to assist, educate, and advocate for members of the bleeding disorders community. These are our sponsors, and we are so thankful for them. As I mentioned, tonight is part 2 of our 4-part series. And we just want to say thank you to Robert and AMC for providing us for this content. If you don't know, HFA was born out of the Committee of 10,000, a grassroots organization which fought for those infected by tainted blood. Based on our origins, the following ethos is read at the beginning of every board meeting as a reminder of our ever-present need for HFA to remain a vigilant voice for the community. The Hemophilia Federation of America solemnly pledges now and forever that it shall be mindful of history and this preamble. HFA shall enforce these policies strictly, diligently, and without exception on behalf of all our community who live with bleeding disorders and in memory of those in our community who have died, lest we forget. Given tonight's topic, there will be a decompression session following this webinar that will be led by Debbie De La Riva, LPC, and mental health first aiders from our community. There are also some resources in our recent Dateline article. The link for that will be shared in the chat, and then later at the end of this session, if you're interested. The community voice drives everything that we do, and available right now on YouTube is our Community Voices and Memorial Art video, which we created in collaboration with Believe Limited, as well as part 1 of this Unspeakable webinar series. So please visit our YouTube channel. To our audience, as we proceed, if you have a question for any of the panelists, please add it to the Q&A box, and be sure to specify who your question is for. Also, feel free to place any positive comments in the chat for our panelists. Let's get started. Like part 1, our panel tonight is impressive. First, we have Robert C. Cooper, who is a blood brother, creator, writer, director, and executive producer of the TV series Unspeakable, as well as his special guests. Rob is a multi-award winning writer, director, and executive producer, best known for his work in the series Stargate. Returning with us tonight, we have Adriana Capozzi, who is a screenwriter, co-producer, and researcher for Unspeakable. Thank you again for joining us, Adriana. New tonight, we have Carl Binder, who is a writer, producer, and director.
Binder.
Oh, Binder, thank you so much.
No problem.
He is best known for his work on Disney's Pocahontas and Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, as well as Stargate. New tonight, we also have Dan Mangan, I hope I'm saying that one right, who is an award-winning singer, songwriter, and film composer, who has just wrapped up a European tour for his latest album. Welcome, Dan. And also returning with us tonight is Rick Waynes, who is a blood brother, activist, and playwright. He is also currently the vice chair for the Canadian Hemophilia Society and was a consultant on the show. And Rick, you are first up because I would love for you to share a little bit about your current endeavor. So before we jump into part 2 of Unspeakable, I want to give Rick some time to discuss his new play, which previewed December 1st on World AIDS Day, and is still running through the 11th in Vancouver, Canada. Kathy Jarvis-Darberson, who many of you know, she and I were fortunate enough to spend that day watching the play in Vancouver, and we're just excited to hear more about your play and its inception and development. So take it away, Rick.
Sure. I don't want to draw too much attention from Unspeakable, but what we have been up to with this new play is, first of all, my name is Rick. I'm HIV positive, was diagnosed in '87. I have a bleeding disorder. back in the late 80s, our bleeding disorder community was kind of reeling, of course, from tainted blood. And I needed, I guess I felt like I needed more support than that I felt like I just needed a different environment maybe. So I ended up, I was invited to the World AIDS Congress in Montreal in '89 and met some men from the Vancouver Persons with AIDS Society, and they invited me to be part of their organization. And so all of these extraordinary, and at the time, mostly gay men in this organization helped me to learn to live and love and, die, because that's what we were doing. And then over the years, I kind of lost, and then highly active antiretroviral therapy came along, and we all were getting better. But there was a lot of, unfinished emotional business, I guess. About 3 or 4 years ago, an oral history research project was begun, and I was interviewed for that. It was a profound experience. It helped me to understand some of those years a bit, those first 15 years, the plague years where everyone was dying. Helped me to pack away some of those feelings a little bit more. That work is never done, but it was an extraordinary experience. So I became part of the research team. And then because I've written a couple plays about my experiences with HIV, I recognized that these 118 interviews that were part of this oral history research project would be an amazing resource for a piece of verbatim theater. So I got to work. Verbatim theater is simply you find a resource like this oral history research project, and you use those interviews to tell a story. In this case, the first 15 years of HIV in Vancouver, largely, but also Victoria and the province more generally. I had some support from the Belfry Theatre in Victoria, and then got more support from a producer here in Vancouver, Norman Armour, who started the Push Festival here, which is an extraordinary festival. And then the Vancouver East Cultural Centre became interested, and they are presenting it. And we've had 2 workshops and 4 weeks of rehearsals, and we have 5 shows left. And the verbatim theater, just to close that loop, you use the words exactly as they are spoken by the interviewees. You leave in all the ums and ahs and every restart of the sentence. But there were, 3,000 or 4,000 pages of interviews. So I had to distill that down to a 2-hour play. And we have a beautiful 10-person cast and a really big, amazing team. We also had a community gathering where people from the HIV community gathered because we've lost some of those spaces where we used to gather, and got to remind ourselves and visit with people we hadn't seen in years, and just revisit some of that community spirit. The show's going great. The reviews are fantastic, and I couldn't be happier. It's an important way for me to continue to have conversations with the people that I lost, and to feel them in the room. And for those of us who lived through that, to be in the room together, to have a safe, beautiful, fun way to deal with some of those experiences. And we've tried to make it fun and celebratory, but also, there's some hard material. I don't know. Is that a good, that feels
It's
like
absolutely, yeah. No, look,
Great.
he's underselling. I mean, obviously he didn't want to brag, but it's absolutely brilliant. He's done a virtuoso job of weaving these, connected but also disconnected stories together in a narrative that is, incredibly funny and heartfelt and powerful and emotional, and for whatever reviews are worth, they are absolutely spectacular. So,
well, that review is worth as much as any of them.
It's truly something very special, and I think as much as I enjoyed the play, I enjoyed watching Rick enjoy his work coming to life, you know.
I am the worst. I am the worst. I'm laughing at my jokes, booing Bill Vanderzam when he comes on the stage. And the cast. I'm there every show, every minute of rehearsal. I'm haunting them, and yeah, I wish I had better control of that. But the material is super important to me, and I like to witness it every night.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, kudos to the cast, who are truly
They were
wonderful, like just really very special, inhabited those people to the point where you forgot in a way that it was verbatim of testimony, and it just felt very, very connected.
Yeah. Thanks.
Rob, I wonder if you mind sharing with, and I've heard this story before, but our community hasn't, how you and Rick met, and what he's convinced you to do since.
Oh, well, that's a longer story. Rick is quite the devil. Yeah, we met in a support group for folks with bleeding disorders through our clinic. And I guess our doctor had tipped Rick off that I had a one ankle fusion already, and that was sort of planning to do another one. And Rick was sort of in line for his, or at least contemplating whether he was going to get his or not. I basically said, absolutely, you have to do it. It'll change your life. And then coincidentally, we actually ended up in the hospital on the same days. We had our procedures at almost exactly the same time. And then we're, spent the rest of the next 3 months laid up in bed, texting each other about our various progress.
Yeah, I think it was, if I recall, I think it was a 2-for-1 deal that week. And so we were able
yes.
to.
Yeah. Oh, you got a deal. I didn't get it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. At one point too, we were talking about our recovery, and Rick was describing his procedure, and I was like, wait a minute, I didn't get that. You got that? Like, he literally had some other, it was complicated, but some other procedure done as well, or some other part of the procedure done. And I was like, wait a minute, how come he got the Cadillac version?
You gotta know people, Rob.
Yeah.
I am sure. Yeah. See, I'm sure some fellow blood family on this call know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to jump into the Q&A for everyone now. Thank you, Rick, for sharing a bit about your passion project right now. I appreciate it. So everyone here has had a significant role in the making of Unspeakable. Last time we heard from Rick and Adriana about why this was significant to them. So I'd like to hear from Carl and Dan. First of all, what was your role in making this TV series? And more importantly, how did it affect you?
Dan, you want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, I mean, I've known Rob, worked together on Stargate, and God, I worked with him for a few years before I even found out that he was a hemophiliac. I mean, it was very interesting because I knew really nothing other than it's a bleeding disease. I mean, I was completely ignorant. And so learning about it through him, and then when he told me that he was thinking of doing this project, and basically pitched it to me over dinner one night, and I was stunned because I didn't know that there was this whole aspect to the AIDS crisis that I had never. I mean, you knew about the virus going into the general population, but the hemophiliacs, the how it impacted them was really, really moving, because as we said in the show, they were the only at-risk population that couldn't do anything to modify their behavior. They had to take these products. So I just thought, wow, that sounds incredible, and it sounds incredibly difficult to pull off in a dramatic, in a storytelling way, because it's so vast and complex and so many characters. And so then he called me several months later, or maybe even a year later, and said, I'm doing it. Would you like to be a part of it? And I jumped at it. So I came aboard as a co-exec, producer, writer, and then we all gathered in an apartment right in Hollywood there. You, me, Adriana, and Lynn.
Yeah.
And I forget the writer's assistant's name, but for a few days. And Rob had already written the first two, right?
I've already written the first two.
Yeah,
episodes.
that's right. And so we then basically broke the next two, or the next three. That's right, the next three.
Yeah.
And then later on, a few months later, we broke the final three. But I was, and still am, incredibly intimidated by this project. I was terrified of it, because there was just so much research, so much to learn, so much. But the biggest thing was, this is Rob's life, right? Ryan is basically, the kid is basically Rob's story. And so when he's tasking you with writing scripts for this, you want to try to at least get it close enough that he can work with, rather than have to throw it all out and start from scratch. So it was a rather detailed, incredibly difficult work to get these scripts written. Adriana was also incredibly valuable. She's like the VIP of the production, as far as like a fountain of information. She knew the research better than anybody. And so I would constantly be coming to her, knocking on her door, barging in, help. So she was a big help. So yeah, so that's how I got involved. And then I was there as a kind of an on-set presence, to help out Rob, and because he had to direct and do a lot of second unit and editing. And so when he wasn't there, I'm sort of there to sort of hopefully make sure that everything gets told in the way it's supposed to get told. So yeah.
I'll lead you in, Dan. We had our post-production supervisor, who I've known for years, and I think she might be watching. We'll see. If not, she'll probably watch this back. But her name's Carrie. Carrie McDowell's her maiden name. She a huge fan of Dan, and she came to me like way before I was even thinking about who could potentially be a composer for the show. And she's like, you have to listen to Dan, and there's a chance he might do it, and you'd be so lucky if he did. So I'm forever grateful to her. Well, that's many things, but for introducing me to Dan, she deserves all the credit.
Well, it's very sweet. I was actually going to also mention Carrie, because we met at a play cafe on Commercial Drive with our two toddlers, kind of playing in an area, and we just got to chatting, and she said she was in film, and I think we exchanged numbers and something, and so when she texted about this, saying, "Oh, I'd love for you to meet Robert," and I think maybe she or you forwarded some document about, and I think at the time maybe the scripts were written, and I read a bunch of the scripts, but it was this document. I could not believe like the vastness and the detail of this document, of how in depth all of the research had gone to, figure out how you could turn this into a story. And I was born in 1983. And I could not believe how little I knew. Like it was almost like it was a similar thing of like really learning about residential schools and realizing that I was going to school here in Canada and knew nothing about this thing that was happening at the same time. It was like the fact that this was not in the common knowledge. This was not, everybody didn't already know about this. And yes, we're going to have another story about it. It just blew my mind. I could not believe what all of these events taking place and the failures of all these people in positions of power. And so it was a story that needed to be told. And Rob's credentials speak for themselves, and we had a great meeting and sort of just talked about it. And I think I just come out of another job doing some scoring work that had been really hard, and I was skeptical of getting back into it because I have my whole other songwriting world that has nothing to do with TV and film. But Robert was very. He said he was going to have a light touch. He was going to let me do kind of get as crazy as I wanted to get, and I really appreciated that. And I have to say, having been involved in many projects, the post-production process of Unspeakable was the most painless, the most on schedule, the most professional, and without any kind of heart palpitation at any point. It was, and I think that a lot of that comes down to you, Robert, and your ability to sort of manage large scale projects. But it was such a pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, look, you were your music career, your songwriting career is well known. Everybody, I mean, certainly the network was very, ooh, you got Dan, they had stars in their eyes, but you hadn't done a lot of composing. You hadn't done a lot, and I believed that you could do it, and I loved what I heard in terms of the kinds of sounds you create. And I wanted to take a risk. I wanted to do something different. I wanted the sound to be unlike any other score that I had heard before. So
you hired someone who can't read music to do your score.
Well, yeah, in a way. And I was going to say, you talked about smoothly. I'm gonna bring up the one challenge we had. I think that the one thing we went back and forth with like a million times was one sound. It was literally the sound of the title coming on.
Oh, yeah.
In the main titles. We went. You finally said to me, because I think I sent you back about I don't know how many times, countless times, and you said, just come to my house. and I came over to your house, and we sat in your studio
in this room,
and you were like, how about this? How about this? How about this? And we finally found something that worked. And it was just one of those things that I guess I had a bit of a one of those freak out moments where I had an idea in my head of what I wanted it to sound like, and I'm completely musically illiterate. I can only ever, I said this again at the beginning, I can only ever speak in terms of the emotion I want to evoke in the scene. So it's like, make me laugh, make me cry. I want to be happy. I want to be sad. I want to be scared. And so that's how I don't know notes or keys or octaves or any of that stuff. So Dan not reading music and me not being able to speak music, somehow we managed.
Perfect strangers, yeah.
Yeah, we managed to make some music together, and the score turned out, just even better than I could have ever imagined.
That opening sound is a little scary, honestly.
Well, and that's what we wanted.
Something bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we wanted. We were sort of like trying to walk the line of the danger, the threat, the gravitas of the subject matter without tipping into horror. Like, we didn't want it to be horrific or feel like a scary movie. It was an important sound. It was like we had these conversations where how do we make something sound powerful and important without and give it its due without feeling kind of like you're either mocking it or going too far into something that maybe would have been hyperbolic in its conception. So yeah, that particular piece was difficult. The rest, honestly, sometimes it was literally just about placement. So the piece would be beautiful, and we'd be like, if we shift this like a few seconds forward or a few seconds backward, it hits the scene better. And that was like the most debate we ever had.
Yeah, it was pretty painless. And it's interesting. I think that a lot of the score of this show could almost be qualified more as sound design than musical, because there's a lot of, it's this synthesizer back there, which is this Yamaha CS60, which is sort of it's like a late 70s, just amazing artifact synthesizer. And a lot of the sounds on this is just me messing around with going, making all kinds of crazy noises, and then just messing around with them and placing them, and then, maybe putting in like some piano here or some guitar there. But I think it was nice because you had a good sense of what you were looking for, but your target was still vague on most of the time, which is the best thing from, rather than trying to match something that is really exact in your mind.
So just conceptually, the way we came at it and the way this show sort of somehow dictated was, because it spanned more than 3 decades, it wasn't one period. Like when people talk about period, you usually tailor to that period the sound that you want. We were dealing with a very broad period, and it changed. And so, there are like 70s, they'll go very electronic, or they'll pick a sound that's specific to that. And yet we didn't want the score to be going through this massive change. We did change the approach to shooting and the cinematography as we moved through the different eras, so that hopefully the earlier years actually looked a little muddier and dirtier and older compared to the more present day scenes. But with the music, we decided not to make choices about trying to match the score to the era. Instead, we said, look, let's make it something that's organic. And if it's organic, it can flow through all those time periods. So we tried to stay away from things that were obviously electronic, that felt just specific to periods. So things that seem almost universal in sound are things like piano and guitar, and then the kind of odd atmospheric sounds that Dan was able to create and then also make music out of. So that created this bed of consistency across the whole show. That was, it sort of born out of, how do we attack a show that doesn't live in one particular space?
Very interesting. I'm going to switch to questions about writing, and then Dan, we're going to come back so you can do some of your sharing, which we'll eagerly await. So this is for most of you, I think. Adriana, specifically you wrote episode 3, and I believe Carl, you wrote episode 4 and 7. That's correct. How does writing a show actually happen? And how do you build a show like this? You might describe the process you went through, either individually or together. And then I'm curious, what did you identify with the most and put yourself in?
Adriana, you want to take that one
Big
first?
concept.
Because I really do feel like, I'll start by saying, I feel like both of you, and I feel like I did challenge you both to find something, even though the show was about some other people, to find something in those episodes you were writing that you could identify with, that you felt like this was something that I could put myself into.
Okay. Well, before getting into that piece, just like logistically, I'll try and sort of sum this up a little bit, which is, once we had the timeline and sort of a sense of these are the events that we wanted depict, then we looked at, okay, we've got 8 hours, 8 episodes, where should they fall? And And that sort of, the first question was like, how do you frame a show like this? And there were a lot of different options. For a few minutes, I think we contemplated the idea of like, do you frame this all through the Creever investigation? But Rob came to the decision that he wanted to tell it chronologically, and that we would just sort of move in and out of the various characters and worlds, provinces, etc. So from there, yeah, we got together in what they call writing rooms, where you sit down and you basically break the arc of the story, and then each episode in the arc of that episode. And then once you have a really strong sense of everything that you need to tell in that story, then you literally like break the beats of them, and then the writers go off and write those episodes. In terms of writing number 3, I think the truth is most of what I put myself into ended up getting cut.
Of course.
Because they weren't really beats that were moving the story forward. And in any television story, but especially a story like this, where there's so much material to get through, you really, unless something is serving the story, it's not going to end up in the final product. So there were a few things that I put in that we lost. And honestly, some of my favorite scenes from episode 3 are scenes that Rob rewrote. Like, this obviously was such a personal story for him. And so, for example, the scene where the character that represents him, Ryan, is talking to his mother and saying, I wouldn't change that I'm a hemophiliac. This is what made me who I am. Those are Rob's words. I could not have written a scene like that. I think I took a stab at writing that scene, and then he was like, okay, let me do my magic. And so, yeah, it was such a fabulous experience working with him, because sometimes as a writer, you have a creator or a showrunner rewrite you just because they want something to sound like them. But in this case, everything that Rob did was really about bringing authenticity forward. And so it always made it better once his hand was in there. So yeah, I see the whole thing really as a collaboration, and I was really, really excited, rewatching that episode and seeing how it came together. But in terms of my connection, certainly as a mother, like, just that was my through line for the whole thing, just the protectiveness of, trying to protect children.
Yeah, as much as Margaret was, loosely based on my own mother, you informed that character in the show maybe more than I did.
Did I?
Yeah, you did. You were the warrior for Margaret in almost every.
Yes, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're like, what's Margaret thinking was
That's
your,
true.
most often sort of contribution, particularly in that episode too. Like, as much as I wrote the words that came out of Ryan's mouth in that scene, you were very instrumental in making sure that the character of Margaret was always important and in our minds, her perspective. So,
well, thank you for reminding me of that. I think it's easy to forget the pieces that we bring to the table, because they're often the things we take for granted. So when I see it, everything that stands out is, the ways that the collaboration made everything so much better. I will say that, like, I just rewatched the whole series, and I'm just so humbled to have been a part of it. And I think, I do see myself all over the series, mostly just in terms of passion, like just in terms of the love and passion that went into wanting everything to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah, I want to hear what Carl has to say, but I also wanted to just reiterate just how much both these two people took on the story. Like, it was almost as if it was theirs as well, and they would come like running in the morning about some thing they had read and how big and important it was and how it had to be in the show. And part of the reason that we hadn't written 6, 7, and 8 was because we hadn't digested all of the Creever material. Like, we had thousands and thousands of pages of testimony from the report, and that had to be, we kind of had to get that together. I mean, I remember the moments when they would, Carl had a chunk of it that was sort of his responsibility to go through, and they'd come in waving it, screaming like, how could they do this? Or you can't believe what this person said. It was, that was pretty amazing.
I mean, the one thing over the entire 8 episodes was that poem, that teddy bear poem.
Right.
Ned Kubin, who was Jim, and you used it in episode 6. I really wish I could have used it in one of my episodes, because when I first read that, when I was going over the testimonies, it just broke my heart. And, as a father of a daughter, I mean, that's the thing, when you say, well, what really did you connect to? I just love the 2 sets, the 2 families, and the one family that communicated and figured things out. And then there was the other family that didn't communicate and fell apart. And just watching these 2 go through this whole 30 years, that's what was so interesting to me. But the other thing that I really liked, well, a couple of things in episode 4 was the introduction of Jim, who was just the Krupke character, who was just a lot of fun. And I saw, well, because this is such a dark, serious series, that here's a really good opportunity for some fun to have with this character, this larger than life character. And so, you take a stab at it, you write, and then Rob comes in and works his magic, and take this chunk out, put this, he just he made the character his, and I just love that character. And in episode 5, he has these wonderful moments with his daughter, and I really loved the humanity of that guy. And the other scene I really enjoyed in episode 4 was Margaret talking to the school board, and the whole, when we got there on the set, and they had set the chair, about halfway. No, move the chair on the other side of the classroom. They wanted nothing to do with her. And then that speech she gave, that was very meaningful, because, as a parent, how far would you go? And I really enjoyed that moment.
That school board scene, you could probably CG some masks on them, and it could have been 2 years ago,
Yeah, exactly. This was one of my questions. How ironic was that scene, or how ironic is that scene to you now, when she tells them, take those stupid masks off? And now we're in a whole new COVID world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes today I want to tell people to put a mask on, but it's look, I think we spoke about this last time, that networks always ask, when you're going to do something that's period, how is this going to be relevant to audiences today? And I think obviously we didn't know there was going to be a pandemic like we had, but there's always ways to relate history to what you're going through today. So
certainly speaks to relevance. We have a community member question that has come in. I'm not sure if you're allowed to say this, so it's okay if you don't want to answer, but they're curious. What did it cost you to put this show together?
The total budget, start to finish, was around 22 million.
Wow. That's bigger than I thought.
Yeah, that's Canadian dollars, by the way.
Okay.
But much smaller than it would have cost had it been, the great thing was that all 8 scripts were written and finished and ready to go at the start of production. So it became this huge, big puzzle piece that had to be put together. And because all 8 scripts were ready, it really allowed for some very clean shooting schedules that it was extremely difficult, but yeah, having everything ready to go really cleaned it up and made it a lot cheaper than I think it could have been.
Yeah, for those who are not television industry literate, your average television show you're watching today for 8 episodes would have cost more like, 60 to 80 million. So we were at it sounds like 22 million sounds like a lot of money, but it's quite a disadvantage in the TV world. All those people and trucks cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think all of our heads of department were close to tears at one point or another.
And we found that hospital in Nanaimo, right? That abandoned hospital, like with all the equipment and everything still in there.
Yeah, that was like there were these total
Gold mine.
strokes of luck that helped us out tremendously, where we would have been scrambling or coming up with some less than adequate decision, and somebody walked in and said, hey, why don't we just go use this hospital? They left all the equipment there and it's abandoned. And so we were
It's just amazing how that happened.
Yeah. Wow. This question is for everybody. The show makes great effort to highlight the significant role of the gay community with the bleeding disorders community, and how they interacted during this time. And I know the answer, but for those who don't know, why was this important to add to the show?
Well, I'll start. I mean, Rick talked about it a little bit off the top. The communities are closely allied because of the common issue we were all dealing with. You couldn't ignore it. I mean, the name of the production company I created to produce the show, you create a purpose-built production company, was called 4-H Productions. And most people, I'm sure, know that the 4-H Club was the people who were affected most by HIV and AIDS. So, and I believe, you also in the video that you guys created for the first webinar, a number of people spoke about the connection and support between the gay community and the hemophilia community. So, yeah, I mean, how could you not address it? There was tension too, and I think that we tried to, we tried to portray that as realistically as possible and be fair with it. But yeah, there was a lot of mutual understanding and support, but there was also some tension because occasionally the communities found themselves with cross purposes.
Yeah.
I should probably leap in here too a little. I think what I found inside of, and this is just my experience, I'm not trying to tell the whole story here, but my experience after diagnosis was that the bleeding disorder community that I knew was struggling, as everyone was. And I don't really feel like the bleeding disorder community is any less or any more. I want to be clear, no more homophobic than any other community. And so what I experienced more than I guess I would have liked to was some of the blame inside of the bleeding disorder community towards the gay community. That's not everyone. It's not the whole story, but it was sort of what I had experienced at that time, and that wasn't the environment I was keen to participate in, and I think that the executive director at the time knew that, invited me to Montreal, where I met these gay men from this organization, and what I found there was, I think, probably a community that had been spending a few decades organizing and resisting and empowering and challenging inside of sort of post Stonewall and liberation, was a community that was already mobilized in a sense, and so the environment that I found myself in at PWA felt, again, just my experience, felt more constructive and forward and more in the I guess it was an environment that just worked better for me for those years because of the experience that community had with organizing.
Anyone else? Thank you.
I would just add
go ahead.
to what Rick said. Yeah, I think in the early days, it took a while for the hemophilia community to really become a group about advocacy. And so it was important for us to show that, there's a scene in, I think it might be the second episode, where Will's character is meeting with a minister, and he's sitting next to a figure who's the head of a AIDS activist group in Toronto. And the character has no lines, but he's there. And the reason he's there is because they were the ones that had the meeting with the health minister. And they gave some of their time to Will to talk about the hemophilia community. So, there was like so much to tell in this story, and you can't tell it all. So you make these little gestures like that to say, for those who are paying attention, this is an example of where these communities work together. But in terms of the fighting for education, treatment, advocacy, all that stuff, they were on the front lines. So,
well, and in our story, I mean, Will is loosely based on Bill, who was Bill Mandela, who was part of the last webinar, and he was actually a Toronto health officer, and so his responsibility in many ways led him to deal with and assist the gay community and how the city was handling the epidemic. So he was part of our connective tissue in the story.
Many community members, since we're on this trail, many community members in the bleeding disorders community who went through this tragedy often express that they feel forgotten about. Part of why we're doing this series as well. And I'm curious if Rick, you or Rob have ever felt like that, and do you have any advice for people who feel that way?
Not sure about the advice, but what I do know is that when highly active antiretroviral therapies came along, the world so the first successful treatments for folks with HIV like myself came along, the world sort of decided HIV was over. Only it really wasn't, and still isn't. And certainly, even if it had been the kind of miracle that ended HIV, which it wasn't, but it still felt to me anyways at the time like, the world moved on and we were just left to our own sort of challenges and dealing with those years that were they were hard. And so, I think I felt pretty lonely afterwards, because those years, they were terrible, but they were also, for me anyway, super empowering. And then highly active retroviral therapy came along and the world moved on. And then I think those of us who were left behind, a little bit like the end of the party, with the stale beer cans and the sadness.
I mean, there's a scene in the show where Paul is watching TV with his wife, and I believe it's the scene where the Pittmans are coming out with their lawsuit or being, talking about that, and and Paul sort of is like, sure, now it hits the gen pop and people care. I mean, I think that was the issue that a lot of people in the bleeding disorders community felt, was that when it was just a few hemophiliacs, nobody really cared. And that, I think, we always we've always had that little bit of a complex about that issue, that and you know, at the time we were afraid to speak up and identify ourselves because of the stigma that was associated with it. So it was almost like this double-edged sword where nobody was reaching out to help, and we were afraid to help ourselves. So
Interesting. Dan, I want to give you a warning that you're up next. But before we get there, there's one more community question that's come in. People are curious, how long did it take you to make the show from start to finish?
well, it depends on what you count, you know, making the show. I mean, I often say 4 years, because I think maybe 3, I guess, from the start of our, I think I originally pitched it in 2015, and then we were done post in 2018. So I guess 3 years is probably accurate, but I'm counting all the research that Adriana and I did, and the writing, and the shooting was reasonably short, as it always is. It's like 12 weeks to shoot the show, and then you have about 12 to 16 weeks of post-production, and then you're, you know, I don't know if you count all the stuff you do afterwards, trying to sell it, you know, and publicize it. So
Yeah, it was basically 2017 was writing the scripts, 2018 was shooting and cutting and finishing.
Yeah.
And then it premiered early 2019, if I remember.
Correct.
Right?
January.
And then a year later, COVID. So I'm so glad you got it done before
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to move back into discussions about music and the score of the show. So music is the heartbeat of cinema and tells the story behind the scenes. So we'd love to hear more about the efforts involved in the musical direction of the show. And Dan, I understand you have some fun clips to show us. So
Yeah, I figured it'd be interesting to sort of show the different. I feel like there was a few tasks with this. It was not an action show, but there's sort of moments of urgency throughout it, and there's these sort of like frantic moments. And I thought maybe I could play a few clips. One that demonstrates where the sound design is sort of reacting to what's going on the screen. But then there's also some very tender moments. One of my favorite moments in the whole show is when Ryan is sort of given a clean bill after they have a big scare.
yeah.
And that's sort of, it follows some other characters just getting some terrible news. And it's sort of like, I remember as a dad with 2 sons going like, oh God, I needed that. You know, I needed that little bit of good news at the end of this sequence. But so I don't know which I should do first. The sort of more.
Do the action one first.
Okay, let's do some action. Okay, so if I share this.
Don't forget to share sound. I always
Yes,
forget to.
that's
Okay.
right. Good call. Here's some action. This is my favorite sort of action sequence here. Is that large enough for you guys? Is it showing large
Yeah.
or okay?
Yeah, let me just set the scene. This is the moment that Will realizes that he may have allowed that Ryan may have actually taken some blood product that had HIV in it.
That study was funded by Qatar. Those results might as well be marketing data for them. No one in the medical community has approached us about this yet.
Hey, where are you going?
You were going to be late. What are you doing? Armor's heat treating process isn't effective. It isn't killing all the HIV in its concentrates.
Brian took some last night.
I know.
What's up?
Oh.
That heartbeat in the background, can feel it in that scene.
But I also
Yeah.
want to like, shout out to Dan, because every time my sort of old school TV instincts would kick in and I'd be wanting to go big or hit something, he'd be like, no, let's go quiet here. Or let's do this. Like even the ending in the mirror, in the window, it's just like, no, this little ticking thing is going to do it for us. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, yep, he's entirely right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting how much time plays into this. Like there's so much. I mean, we're watching the show through different time eras, and everything's sort of up against the clock. How fast can they get better product? How fast can they get some cures? How fast and that sort of like ticking clock. I remember that was a note from Robert at one point of just wanting that sort of like, and so kind of adding that in, but then the heartbeat playing against that, pumping blood, a little kick drum action there.
But I loved how it was intense while Will was sorting through the garbage and going into the fridge, and then the minute Margaret walks in, it drops back, like, because she's not in the moment yet, right? She doesn't figure it out, and so you pulled back on the music there too, and then it starts to sort of gain a little more tension and momentum as both her and Ryan get brought in on what's going on. So yeah, you have to know the scripts and the story and the everything as well as anybody, in some cases better than I know it, because you're often telling me what's happening in the scene with the music before I even really realize it. So
I think editors have this too, but I remember like going to the premiere at the Chan Center and feeling like I had spent like hours and hours and hours with every one of the actors there, like that they should be as familiar with me as I am with them, this sort of like but yeah, I watched that scene probably 700 times or something like that. But I think it's important with score. It's like as soon as the music is too on the nose or it's too prominent, it can kind of sink the scene, and you want to help people feel what you want to help them feel. But if you tell people too overtly what to feel, then you're almost like sucking away the actor's work and the writer's work, because they, so much work has gone into the scene, and if the music just ham-fists the feeling over top of it, you're sort of not serving the ability and the skills and talent and all of the other collaborators to make that scene come alive. But, do you guys want to see something a little more sentimental?
Sure. Whatever you got.
Okay, let's go with this. So this is a pretty heartbreaking sequence, but an important one, I think.
Let's see.
The doctor said I shouldn't worry. He didn't sound at all like he believed it.
Just give me the results.
You've tested positive for HIV. Now, what we know at this point
I know
is...
what it means. I'm a physician.
I don't understand. Couldn't you...
Not anonymously.
see. Before you go, I need to ask you a few questions. Are you in a sexual relationship?
Hello. Hello. Nice to see you all together. Well, firstly, the big news I'm sure you're all waiting for. You tested negative for HIV.
Well, that's good.
This looks great.
Oh, that's beautiful. There's beautiful music behind that. Wow.
Yeah. I think so. It's funny. I love how Ryan is relieved. That's good, right? And I just like, you can just feel what the parents are feeling, which is just like, you want to go scream on a mountaintop kind of thing,
Yeah.
But look, like, think about, just think about the challenge of that sequence, right? Which is incredible because you have 3 people finding out news, right? And each one is different. And the middle one, Derek Naylor, is complicated because he's one of the people who may have been responsible for all these people getting infected. And so, again, what Dan was talking about in terms of not having the music judge the character or the scene, and it's allowing you to sort of feel that piece of music. To me, is sort of feeling the weight of the tragedy of the whole thing and not necessarily speaking specifically to that character, but it allows you to realize even in that moment he's a human being, right? Regardless of what you've seen him do or how you may feel about him, there's a humanity to him that the music is speaking to that is really beautiful. And then to shift from that, the weight of the tragedy, into a moment of relief and joy and happiness. I mean, again, not easy because the music doesn't really change that much. It was all there in the first place. So here's a piece of music that's speaking to about 10 different very weighty things, and it accomplished all of them. So yeah, incredible.
Kudos.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the sort of trigger hair distance between sadness and happiness is, like it's amazing how those, I mean,
both make you cry.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's the key is, sometimes you don't know whether they're happy or sad tears. And
right.
Yeah.
Or angry tears, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of angry tears, I think that this next scene I have for you guys is it's where I'm forgetting his name, but he interrupts the vacation, the tropical vacation, to rant on the telephone about the injustice of the report and everything.
That's Ben talking to Will, I think. Right?
That's right. So let's give that a go here.
I'll get it.
Hello? Ben! Hey, what's up?
Criminal trial's just been postponed.
What? Again?
Yeah. I'd say it was a joke, but it's not funny.
I thought the judge ruled against Perot's attempt to drop the charges.
She did, but now one of the Crown's expert witnesses who was hired to review the case has written a 37-page report. He says he can't find any basis for continuing the criminal charges.
Seriously?
Yeah. And Perot's lawyer's on TV saying the case for prosecutors has disintegrated.
And has it?
Who the hell knows anymore? Prosecutors have requested a 2-week adjournment to seek guidance from the Attorney General on whether to proceed. The judge said no. She's given them 3 days to get their act together. Those sons of bitches are gonna get off.
Ben.
5 years. 5 years, and now in 72 hours, this case could completely fall apart and those pricks walk free. I swear, Will, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Oh, I'm on the edge of my seat, worried.
There's so much of like when you see injustice and you feel like it's being largely ignored, it makes the injustice even more unbearable. You know, it's like that. So, I don't, and when he says at the end, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, I think that that feeling, I mean, it is so unbearable. I just wanted the music to just feel like every vein in your body is about to burst because you just don't know what you're, you know, that sort of feeling of on the edge of your seat.
It worked very well. I have one more scene to ask you about. I don't know if you have it pulled up, and it's okay if you don't, but I really loved how the music, the clock that you mentioned, really picks up when they're preparing for the inquiry and putting all that work together, and they're rushing around, you know, all kind of crazily and trying to figure out wording, and Jim's trying to use stronger words, and they're kind of debating. That music behind those scenes, I really enjoyed that because it makes you like want to get up and move too. Like I'm waiting to see what's going to happen.
I think, and it's like the time, it kind of like shifts time a few times, like a bit of a montage between. Yeah. I think, you know, what's funny is I think that we had we had temp music there, and I did my darndest that whenever there's really, really, really good temp music in a show. And then it's like you say to the composer, okay, we want something that's just like this, but, you know, don't infringe on any copyright, you know? And I think that I did my darndest to try and create something. And I think we ended up going back and licensing the actual temp music at that point.
What happens for those who aren't sort of aware is, you know, a lot of times when you're in the editing room, that's the first stage. And you have an idea in your head, you're cutting a montage, you want to cut it to music. So you just pull some piece of music that kind of fits the rhythm of what you want. And then, you know, later you go in and the composer gets involved. So yeah, as Dan pointed out, we got a little married to that little piece.
But it happens. You can't avoid it. It's, I mean, in regular music world, you call it demoitis, where you make a demo and it's some inspired moment at 2 a.m. and then you go into a studio and you're paying everyone to be there and it's costing $1 million and you're like, okay, let's capture the magic just like the demo, but better, you know. And it's like you say, you cut to the temp music. It's timed to the temp music. Everything fits with the temp music, and it's really difficult.
I want to talk a little bit about, and I actually want to talk about some of the source music that we used as well, and you know, the choices that were made and who made them. But I also, before we get to that, I really want to point out that very, very rarely do you have a composer who can actually sing. And Dan is absolutely incredible, has a beautiful voice. And in a number of cases, you know, created you know, some songs for us, or sang some cover versions of some famous songs. But what I again respected so much about that is a Dan Mangan cover is not a cover, it's Dan Mangan version of that song. It's always different, it's always unique. It feels special and somehow became a part of the show in a way that just taking that pre-recorded song and putting it in the show would not have been, you know, nearly as impactful. So there are definitely a couple that are really, really special in the show.
I do have one lined up, which is the cover of Hallelujah during the wedding. Yeah. And Rob and I went back and forth on this because I was like, no, man, we can't do Hallelujah. Like Leonard Cohen himself was like, stop covering my friggin' song, you know? But then we went back and forth, and then I did a version that is quite different, you know, and in the end, I think it worked really well. And I'm glad that you persisted.
Well, and my argument to Dan, what I think sold it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we did a little dive into the meaning of the song, and the song is actually not meant the way it's used most of the time. Mm-hmm. It's the lyrics are, I don't know, the ironic is the right word, but are not intended to be celebratory. And so we juxtaposed the visuals, the story, are a juxtaposition of this beautiful sort of moment in which Peter is getting married, a thing that he never believed in his life would ever be possible, with this very dark aspect of Ben's obsession with the criminal investigation. And I felt like if you understood the true intention of the song, then the irony of the way it was being used was well worth maybe being accused of retreading an old trope,
Well, also they talked about it on their first date, right? That was part of their conversation.
Right. But I think didn't we go back and manufacture that when we knew we had that song that we decided we were going to, or did we take the chance that we were going to get that song when we wrote that line? Because I remember there were a couple of different versions of which song we were going to have them talk about.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm not remembering either, but I know that the reason we also wanted that song, or thought it was finally, it was going to be a kind of ordained, shall we say, is where we were shooting it in Stanley Park is known as Hallelujah Park. There is a plaque that says Hallelujah engraved in the park where we were shooting that. So we felt like maybe it was meant to be.
Well, and the placement too, like it sort of seeps in over a couple of preceding scenes, and it's almost twisted. Actually, I think it comes in after Jim says they should pay or something like that. Yeah. And so all of the sort of nuanced double meanings of the song, I think we were able to kind of draw on them, Shall I pull it up here?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
I think people should pay, and not in money. You ask me what I think these people are who did this to us? Criminals. They are criminals.
Do you have the rings? Place the ring upon her finger and repeat after me. I, Peter Thomas Landry.
I, Peter Thomas Landry.
Take you, Elizabeth Darby Stevens.
Take you, Elizabeth Darby Stevens.
Be my wife from this day forward.
Be my wife from this day forward.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
We didn't get AIDS. They gave it to us.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness, anyways. In sickness and in health.
What happened to your son is not an accident. You ask me what I think. I think people should pay.
To love and to cherish, till death do us part.
You may now kiss the bride.
Beautiful.
Getting a lot of episode closing moments on these. That's where all the music comes in heavy.
But like the way that it begins, it doesn't feel immediately recognizable as that song. It feels like score. And then it becomes all background, and then it takes on this sort of haunting quality of really, I think, accentuating not just that moment that's traditionally sort of, used for, but like the tragedy of what Ben is going through, and the fact that he's not there at his own son's wedding, which should have been celebratory.
And this beautiful moment juxtaposed with the very complex, all of it's again, trying to capture all these things with one bit of glue was tricky, but I think it was. I mean, that's when scoring gets the most fun, is that you get to kind of just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
We did have some songs that we were able to pull. In most cases, I don't know if there were any exceptions, but I think in most cases the songs were all Canadian. We wanted them to be Canadian songs, and we really tried. I'm sure we could get caught on this at some point, but we really tried to have them be proper to the era. So we didn't put a song in that wasn't on the air or had been written at the time that it was being shown in the show.
Well, the Sam Cooke, remember the whole Andy Kim debacle?
Yeah, there were a couple of situations where we had songs that we had in mind. And, getting rights to songs is hard enough. Sometimes, because you need both Dan, help me out here. You need both the label and the publisher. Is that right?
Yeah, you have two sides. You have the master side, which is the actual recording document, and you have the sync side, which is the intellectual property of the song itself. So you could get the sync rights to Yesterday, but they would say, but there's no way we're going to give you the actual recording rights of Paul McCartney singing it. So you have to go and make your own version of it. And so in this case, you guys got the sync rights from Leonard Cohen's team. And then, I whipped up a new custom made master for the show.
Yeah. And in the case of the song that Carl's talking about, which is what was played when Margaret and Will are dancing out in the backyard, we had a different song in mind. And
Rock Me Gently.
Yeah. And the gentleman who performed the song was a little hard to wrangle into giving us the rights. And we ended up using something else, which was great. So it was that was fun. We had someone named Natasha Dupree was our music supervisor consultant, and a lot of times I would come in with a playlist and say, here's some songs I'd really want to hear, and she'd be like, well, that's good, but here's a better one. I wanted a song by Chilliwack in there because it's so sort of iconically Vancouver, and well, it's iconically Chilliwack, which is a real place. But she was just incredible at bringing us stuff. There were some that we sat around and said, well, we got to have this. I remember, Carl, you were super excited for episode 4 when we finally got Safety Dance. When we actually, I think we found out the day we were shooting, didn't we? We were going to shoot it with sound to that.
Yeah, she sang along with it.
Right. And we didn't know in that moment, or right up until that moment, that we actually had the rights to do that.
That's right.
So yeah, that was a fun part of it.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate you sharing all those things with us and giving us this insider's look into the process. Next question is about writing. We're going to talk about dialogue for a little bit. So anyone who had a hand in that, how much latitude did you have with some of the dialogue and surrounding the families and the executives, all of the culpable parties, if you will, and maybe what was difficult with dialogue?
Well, the fictional characters, obviously we could have them say whatever we wanted to a point. They couldn't say anything, because if they were then erroneously implicating a real person, that would have been a legal problem. Mm-hmm. Even having Jim at the end saying, you want to know what I think they're criminals. The way it had to be phrased, I think they're criminals. He couldn't have said they're criminals. Mm-hmm. That would have been too on the nose. It would have been too objective. And so that was tough. You know, we often stole from things that real people said to us. You know, as Adriana and I were doing our interviews, we would write things down, or she would write things down that would be like, this nurse said that, we have to put that in the show. And so we would find places to build scenes around those real moments. I mean, so many of the bits of dialogue were things that people said to us. But then, you know, we had lawyers go through the scripts and you know, tell us what we couldn't say on very often. I don't know, Carl, if you remember any particular scenes.
No, I did. You summed it up perfectly. Like, you know, you do your best, and then the lawyers look over and say, no, you can't do this, can't do that. But yeah, it could be frustrating at times, but you also, in your pass on the scripts, you also cleaned a lot of that stuff up that we may have inadvertently, you know.
Well, I didn't have any choice. I had lawyers breathing down my neck.
But you knew more than we did as to what could and couldn't be said.
And to be honest with you, I think I still, there's certain lines that I cringe at when I watch the show, but for the most part, I was surprised at what we got away with.
Yeah, I was really rewatching it. I was really happy with what was in there, I have to say, because it's another one of those things where in the moment you fret about the exact wording of what you want versus what the lawyers will allow you to have. But with some time and distance, I feel pretty good about what we represented. But in terms of the actual figures, we actually had to double source every line from somebody who was real. We had to provide 2 sources of them saying these words verbatim, sometimes video footage, like, and in any case, in terms of the Creever Commission, almost everything you hear was real testimony. So
we had one, I won't name them, but a person, it was none of the executives involved. They were all actually very respectful. We had one person early on who read the script and criticized it that the dialogue was too expositional, and it was like that people were talking too much about the subject, and you know, and you know, they aren't wrong in many cases in terms of having characters talk around the subject and leave the subject as the subtext. But in this case, that is what we did. We talked about it all the time. I mean, my dad was a biochemist, my mom was a teacher. You know, dinner time would be about this piece of the science or this piece of the social problem. Everybody talked about it all the time. I mean, you know, it would have been false to not have people discussing what was going on, the most important thing going on in their lives at that moment. So, you know, I still sort of defend that part of it where, you know, yeah, of course everybody's talking about the thing that's going to kill them at this moment, you know.
So for those who have not read the books Bad Blood or The Gift of Death by Vic Parsons and then Andre Picard, some people might not know like who in the show were actual real people unless they've done their research. So I'm curious if you might share, and Rick, you might too, join in there. Who was real and who were merged characters?
Adriana, you want to take some of this? I'll take some of it.
Sure.
But if you want to start, go ahead.
You want me to start? So, I mean, for the most part, anybody who was in the public eye is a real person. So all of the politicians, doctors, all of the figures from the Red Cross, anybody who was named in an actual lawsuit, these were all people that we depicted as actual individuals. And I can name some of those, you know, the Red Cross, we had Roger Perot, Derek Naylor, John Derrick, we even had like Rosalind Hurst.
Martin
So like,
Davey.
Martin Davey. And then in terms of the hemophilia community, those were mostly composites. So Lawrence Hartley was an amalgam of a few different people from the Ontario and National Canadian Hemophilia Society. And then Paul was very much based on two Ontario lawyers, James Krepner and John Plater, who were huge inspiration in this story.
Well, some of the other medical, like Christos Soukas, Dr. Christos Soukas, who was on the front line of recognizing the problem and really being a leader in getting out in front of AIDS awareness and treatment. We actually spoke to him a few times. In almost every case, with the exception of the Red Cross folks who didn't want to speak to us or aren't around anymore, we made a point of speaking to the real people and getting their approval and really trying to get a sense of, like, even with Dr. Soukas, I would ask him personal questions, and he was the one who told me he used to go for runs all the time. So we had that character going for jogs. And so we tried to infuse their character in the show with who they really were. Marlis Edward, who was the lawyer for the Creever inquiry. We spoke with her. But yet some of the people, like on the medical side, were composites. Like Anne O'Malley was a nurse, but she was very much a composite of many of the nurses that we spoke to. Although her first name is really a nod to the nurse who looked after me and really was instrumental in my health and well-being for most of my formative years. They were such heroes. Like the nurses were incredible heroes in this situation, and in some cases, like with Anne, made decisions that were against the protocols that they were being given in order to save lives.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we would take details from a person who was being depicted, but give it to somebody else. I mean, Soukas, we got so much information from him, including the fact that as a doctor, people wouldn't shake his hand. And we didn't put this in because we never went home with him, but he, in the early days before it was known exactly how it was transmitted, he would actually strip down when he got home and change his clothes before like going into his home. So yeah, they were like, but the handshaking was, that came out in various stories, but as a doctor, that was one that came from him as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up. This was one of my questions. Maybe that's why you did. I really appreciated those scenes because of the stigma that was associated with touching. The scenes where these blood brothers and advocates shake hands as they begin or throughout their advocative work at that time. You really honed in on those. And I think I know why, but do tell us why that was so important to highlight.
I don't remember, what is the episode where I guess Paul comes to work for Lawrence and he holds out his hand and they shake hands. I don't remember which episode that is exactly, but yeah, I mean, look, little things like that are as meaningful and important and powerful as any speech. You can't write something like that. And again, look at the resonance that particular moment has to today, where I think handshakes are still a little awkward. You kind of have to ask the question, are you okay with shaking hands or hugs, or people are still bumping elbows. It's our social interaction is incredibly a powerful part of our lives. And when stuff like that, inhibits it, it's hugely problematic. So
yeah. I hate to say it, but we're nearing the end. So if there's anything else any of the panelists want to say to our community before I run through some quick announcements, by all means, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, we would, I'll speak for everybody saying thank you very much for watching the show and for joining us in this conversation. And we made it a little bit for ourselves and a little bit for the community. Obviously we want as many people to see it as possible, because I think we wanted it to be a little tribute to what people went through and what the crisis meant to us in the community, but we really made it for the community, for people to take from it what they can. So yeah, thanks for tuning in and thanks for watching, and we appreciate it.
I would just say thank you for letting me be a part of it, and for the education of it all. From knowing absolutely nothing about this story to getting headlong into it, but I just really appreciate it, and all of the people here, the people that it was such a solid team, and so everyone was that I experienced was so easy to work with and positive, and just it was from the beginning to end, it was a really pleasant experience for me to be involved.
And thank you, Jeanette, for putting this all on. So
Carl, you wanted to say something?
No, I just said me too. I echo what Dan just said. That was great. Yeah.
Wonderful. I hope you won't be annoyed. I'm going to show you guys just one more slide. Make sure you get these important announcements from our team. Bear with me just 1 second. So we finally landed on a part 3 date. So if you've enjoyed these first 2 parts, save the date for February 28th. I do believe a link is coming into the chat if you would like to go ahead and register for part 3. And as mentioned earlier, or before, part 4 is actually going to be live at Symposium. Rob will be there, and I'm not sure who he's bringing yet, but you'll have to come and find out and join us in Florida, April 13th through 16th. And I do want to remind everyone that next week we have a webinar on emotional and financial support for the holidays put on by our services team, which might be pertinent to you. And as mentioned before, earlier in this session, there will be a decompression session that will be starting in just a few minutes, led by Debbie De La Riva and our mental health first aiders, who are volunteer community members. You should have gotten that link in an email while we were talking. So go to your email and look for that link, and we will enjoy seeing you there. And of course, any of our panelists are welcome to join us as well. So we're going to say farewell for tonight, and thank you all for being with us. If you've been a panelist, feel free to hang out, but to our attendees, we will see you later. Good night and good evening. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.